Welcome to the Functional Nurse Podcast, where we explore how nurses are transforming healthcare through functional medicine and nurse-led innovation. I'm your host, Brigitte Sager, founder of the Institute for Functional Nursing. Here, we're reclaiming our role as healers and leaders, one root cause conversation at a time. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Functional Nurse Podcast. My name is Brigitte Sager. I'm your host, and I'm here today with Megan Kroeker. She is a nurse practitioner specializing in functional medicine, gut health, and hormone balance. She blends science and compassion to help women reconnect to their bodies, find clarity amidst health overwhelm, and create lasting wellness through root cause healing. Megan is faculty with us at IFN. She spoke at our recent summit, and her topic was the crash course, how a personal health crisis forged a functional nurse. And she is part of our upcoming functional nursing program development team. We are really excited to be getting the ball rolling on developing all the content for our functional nursing program. Megan is part of our faculty inside the membership that we have been running since January 2025. And she is also going to be helping to develop several of our modules inside the full program. Megan, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. And all of that you just shared made me so excited to be part of this.
Is very exciting. I thought we could start with, for people that did not see the summit, because I feel like that is kind of a little bit of your background in that story. Could you share with us kind of how you came to your nursing career and ultimately where you are now?
So for me, I've always loved health and taking part in other people's health journey. And of course, nursing, as a caring, empathetic person, feels like the right line of work to be in. And as a nurse, I worked doing some time in emergency and labor and delivery, very like high paced, intense environments where I'm like, you have to be on all the time. And that evolution of doing that while you have little kids, working shift work. So kind of, you get into that frame of mind where it's like, go, go, go. Like, I think there's so much of that buzzword of being burnout, but kind of, yeah, being in that situation where you're just in the grind, where you're like caring for other people, caring for your family, maybe not paying as much attention to your own health, but you're just like showing up and doing the work. And I remember this point in my career, I was working in labor and delivery, and I was walking into work. I actually was in the process of like, okay, should I do something different? Maybe I should work in the OR. That might be a little bit easier and less stressful, like a little bit more structured. And I was walking into work. It was a cold December morning, and I live in Canada. I was like wearing a big parka, had my hood up, and I was just across the street from the hospital. It was a red light, and I started walking across the street, and I got over halfway across the street, and I knew it was going to happen, but I couldn't stop it. A guy just blew around a red light, and yeah, I got hit by a truck. So like that like literal yeah, when you hear people say like, oh, you look like you've been hit by a truck, like that hits home for me in a different way. So that was a really big turning point in my health, but also in my career, because it started getting me thinking about like, what do I really want and how do I prioritize my own health? And so much of the time in nursing, we're very focused on taking care of everybody else. And one of the things that really stood out was like while I was in the ambulance going around to the other side of the hospital to go to the emergency department, they were, I was carrying like one of those big cans of coffee in my bag to bring into the lounge at work. That was actually what saved my life, because that crushed on my right side where the truck hit me. I had facial fractures and like my hip and leg were injured, but my like internal organs were protected by this can of coffee. Wow. But what was I thinking during that ambulance ride? To the paramedics, I was like, oh, I've got a can of coffee in my bag. Do you guys want it? Like, I wanted to take care of them and say thank you.
Such a nurse thing, yeah.
And then when I was sitting like basically they're getting me in for CT angiogram, like make sure that I'm not dying, right? And they're like, who do you want us to call? And I said, well, you should probably call my work because they might have saw that happen out the window. And they're like, no, like your family. And I was like, oh, they're probably still sleeping right now. It's like just where your brain goes, that you're thinking of other people all the time and not just thinking like, hey, I almost just died. So yeah, put a lot of things into perspective, thinking about my career path, my health, how I take care of other people, and of course, my own health journey through that recovery period after that, where I feel like I always put so much trust into the system to take care of patients, to take care of me. And then suddenly, when things don't actually go as you anticipate, having a concussion, that was not ever really something I had learned a lot about, right? Because when you see someone in the hospital, like if they're in a merge and they're okay, you're sending them home. And then you don't ever see what the aftermath of that is. And for me, no one even said to me that I had a concussion, which how could I not have a concussion? I got hit in the face with a truck, right? Like had facial fractures. So how could I not have some concussion symptoms there? So that became this whole evolution for me of like, I was being given different medications and treatments that were actually making things worse. I was getting more side effects from the medications. I wasn't feeling better. And then it started getting me on this pathway of like, there's got to be more. There's got to be something else. What am I missing here? And so that became me being more of an active participant in my healing, but also questioning like, what are we doing in this healthcare system, right? Where are we like missing the whole point of healthcare, right? Healing. So that definitely got me on more of this healing journey and trying to understand health on a deeper level. Ultimately, I ended up deciding to go back to school to be a nurse practitioner. But even after that, I was still like, I'm just doing the diagnosis, I'm following the algorithms, but I wanted to do more of the critical thinking and not using just the cookie cutter approach. And when I found functional medicine, I was just like, wow, how did I not learn this stuff in school? Like, how is this not just mainstream? Like, some of it is so simple, but at the same time, it feels mind blowing. And ever since then, I really haven't turned back.
I'm thinking of like if instead of going to nurse practitioner school, all like so many nurse practitioners that I know that have this similar topic, and that like if we'd just gotten functional training instead, it would have been like, that's what I was looking for. Cause when you said that, I was just thinking about the day that I realized in primary care, I was getting dinged if I didn't put somebody on a statin or, like if you're not getting the percentage of your panel that has this diagnosis on this prescription drug category, like, then you get dinged for it. And I think, a lot of corporations in healthcare do that. And just like, how is that a measure of achievement versus like improving their cholesterol numbers or you know what I mean? Like just
Yeah.
in everything. How is that high on the list? But I feel the same way as you. And when people ask me about MP school, I'm like, I mean, it does give you some more scope for many nurses, depending on where you live. Because in some, it restricts you to where now you need a supervising provider to have a practice of your own. But in general, I find that nurse practitioners go to school to be what they wanted to be in nursing, and they find that it's more medical, and then they find functional medicine and go, "Oh, yeah, that's
Yes.
what I was looking for. This is
Yeah.
it."
It's so true because it's really thinking about using your critical thinking and problem solving a lot more, where I think in nursing, we sometimes don't exercise that enough because we just don't challenge what the orders are that we're being given as nurses. But if you start asking questions and thinking about it, maybe there's a different approach that you can take. And I know, like, as a mentor, whenever I had nursing students, I was always the most scared of nurses or students that didn't ask questions because that's the person that's going to just take an order and run with it without thinking about the consequences. Sometimes as nurses, we are most often the ones that are interacting more frequently with patients, having the more in-depth conversation, having a lot of that bond and, the nurse patient relationship where it's so much trust is built. And if we can be an advocate and then bring that back to whoever is overseeing us as a nurse, that can be very powerful, right? Yeah.
Yes, I agree. I know exactly what you mean about the not asking any questions too. I would love it if you could talk a little bit about your journey to having your own practice, but in that, if you could touch on, we haven't had a lot of nurses outside the United States on the podcast, as I'm sure you've know, like that's probably a pretty
Hmm.
common theme for you. And we've you and I have talked before about, Canada's a little bit different. And a lot of my students in the past, as they're researching their scope, they don't even think that anybody would want care that costs cash in
Yeah.
Canada because of your system. So could you kind of touch on those themes and tell us a little bit more about what you offer?
Yeah, it was definitely something that like I had to overcome that train of thinking as well. So as a nurse practitioner, I worked in a publicly funded, like a government funded system where people come, they don't pay anything, they just show their health card and their care is covered. So I kind of had that mentality too, like how can I start a private practice and people pay out of pocket for it? Nobody's going to want to do that when they can get it for free, but I'm offering something completely different. They're not
Yep.
getting that from their doctor's office or their nurse practitioner's office typically. So, for instance, I take an hour to sit with someone during their intake appointment. When is the last time you ever had a medical appointment that was 1 hour long, that was paid for by your health insurance? So I think people are in a transition where I think some people are willing to invest in their health, and some people very much are of the belief like the system should take care of me. And a lot of the time, if they're of that belief, they're also not of the mindset of wanting to make change either, which functional medicine requires so much investment on the patient's part, not only in their money, but also in their actions. So if they're thinking they're just going to walk in and get a magic answer from a functional medicine practitioner, nurse, whoever, yeah, you can help them put the pieces of the puzzle together to create more clarity, but there's still going to be work on their end. So I find since I started my own practice, well, it was actually interesting because I first worked part-time as a nurse practitioner in a public system while I was doing my IFM certification. And IFM, they really encourage you to apply what you're learning while you're learning it. So I was trying to do that in a clinic setting, but when you're restricted with time, and also having these other things like how you kind of mentioned, I don't find in Canada we have quite as much for like being dinged necessarily for
Mhm,
not
mhm.
prescribing certain things, but it definitely is like there's these guidelines where it's like, okay, if you have diabetes, you get this is this is the algorithm, this is what you get, instead of like thinking about what medications you're going to use for protection of their kidneys, and instead of spending time sitting and talking about diet and lifestyle, right? So it was difficult for me to apply what I was learning in a really thorough way because number one, sometimes people didn't want to hear it, and then number two,
Mhm.
the people that did want to hear it came in with the expectation of like, holy man, I just found this nurse practitioner and she practices functional medicine and we're going to figure everything out. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I have 15 minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I can't fix all of it in 15 minutes, or I can't even get enough history because it's never about just what's happening in the minute. It's about that entire timeline of what led you up to that minute. So then I essentially ended up deciding, okay, I got to just dive right in. I got to leave the clinic. And I mean, for a little while, I did part time of my own private practice. And then I realized if I'm 1 foot in here, 1 foot in there, I'm just holding myself back. So essentially, I had done like some different business coaching along the way, which was really helpful in helping me get over some of the mindset of people aren't going to want to pay for this. I was seeing people did want to pay for it. And I had to also get over the fact of thinking I was leaving a gap in the system by me leaving that public system. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm letting people down. I actually was letting people down by not being more available as a functional practitioner. So by me leaving and putting my 100% into my private practice, it just keeps flourishing because people see that I'm dedicated to it and that it's my passion. And then also they don't have the chance to say like, oh, well, I can go see Megan for free in this other system, where then I also am like, I can't actually provide all the services that you want.
Yeah.
So it is a scary thing to have to leave that. And also just even the whole picture of the golden handcuffs of working for an organization, right? And then that's a whole other conversation of leaving to start your own business.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
it is, yeah, it's so basically to put it simply is people are willing to pay for the services. And it's interesting, I think no matter what you're selling, like there's going to be people that are they value that or they don't. Like it could be maybe they'd rather spend their money on a fancy car, so they don't want to put it into their health. And then there's people that I see sometimes that I think, oh my gosh, like I feel bad that I have to charge them this money because I don't think that they have very high income. They can't afford it. But those are sometimes the people that say, I've saved up for this and this is really important to me. So it's all about priorities.
I'm really glad we're talking about this because I in probably the last 10 or more meetings I've had with students, this has come up a lot, and, like, feeling guilty about not offering it covered by insurance through Medicaid in the United States, for example, like, people struggling with that, and I'm like, if you wanna offer something different, you probably have to kinda take some of the steps like we're talking about, right? Like, it's hard to do it in the system. That being said, you can still go give a free talk at your community center, and you can still give back in 10 other ways. You can volunteer, you can work part-time, you can do things to still care for people in the way that you might feel is better or more giving of ourselves, right, in our profession. But at the same time, I think what you just said is so, like, poignant. There are so many communities with nobody offering something better like this for people that are ready, and they don't have that support. And so by not stepping into this space, you're leaving that gap in your community. And so people can look at it either way. And yes, it would be great if this was covered by insurance or free for everybody everywhere. Like I would love that, right? Like ultimately
Mm-hmm.
that's the goal is like functional nursing helps fill all those gaps in the systems that aren't working well and more people get this type of care. But in the meantime, do we just not offer it? And do we not does what other profession is struggling with whether their income should pay for their life? The way that we do as nurses. It's like, gosh, should I really take money for this? Yes, it's your job. It's
Yeah.
not volunteer time, right? It could be if you I mean, I don't know, right? If somebody wants to do that. Anyway, really like how you said it too. Just like it that's as much a disservice as the other perspective is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it is. It's you. I think for myself also, it's been such a growth, a personal growth and evolution because you have to deal with your own stuff too. Like
Mhm, mhm.
to be able to be in a position, like for instance, when you say are charging money for something, how uncomfortable that can be, and it brings up your own stories that you're telling yourself. And sometimes a lot of it is truly stories, and you have to unravel that in yourself. And then also when you come at it with confidence, then people trust you a lot more too, right?
Yes, and if you say, like, "I solved this problem for people," right? Like, you can really articulate that. Can
Hmm.
you share a little bit about, like, just specifically being in Canada? And I know a lot of my students have been from Canada, and they've voiced this to me. What conversations are you having with nurses and nurse practitioners about that whole idea of not being part of the healthcare system there in the completely covered by insurance sort of way? Like, and doing something like what you're doing?
Yeah, I think it is kind of coming up with, I mean, licensing wise, it's something that we're allowed to do. We're allowed to have our own private practices. Some people think that it's, yeah, like, I don't know, you're creating a whole other system or something. But I kind of think of it, for instance, if you go to see a naturopath, right? That is not something that the healthcare system is covering. So it's something above and beyond where it's a different service that you're paying for. And I think more and more, like, yeah, people are okay with paying for it. It is something, yeah, where it is an out of pocket service, but it doesn't change what I can provide, like ordering labs and prescribing. That is, something that I can do, but I try, I personally try to still have it where they still have their primary care provider involved.
Hmm.
And some primary care providers are really supportive of having me involved with their patients, and other people sometimes get a little bit territorial, perhaps, or maybe it's that they're threatened that, their patient who could come see them for free is choosing to come see me and pay out of pocket. Maybe I kind of felt that maybe that is a little bit threatening, or they feel offended. But ultimately, I think that I'm helping them. I'm helping their patient become healthier. A lot of the time it's people where it's like, say, other providers where they're kind of at a loss. They don't know what else to do. And sometimes I can fill that gap. And same, like it nursing, even having the role of having more education, more of the coaching role. So much of the time I think about that's a lot of what we end up doing in nursing and functional medicine is half the session sometimes ends up being more like therapeutic listening, therapy, kind of like talking through what's holding us back and what is like the emotional side of our health. And so you think about that, people pay for therapists too, right?
Right. Yeah.
Those things, they're so important to our health, but they're just not part of what the system covers.
Yeah, I'm thinking like I could think of like 10 integrative somethings that people pay cash for, and nobody but nurses are wondering if they could charge money, right? Like
Yeah.
hypnotherapists. Like there's so many examples.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe just that societal, yeah, just what we created the image of a nurse, right? Is a nurse that works in a hospital, or maybe someone that does some home care services or long-term care. Like we have that as an image, because a lot of people don't even think of nurses working in primary care.
Hmm.
Like they still tend to think of that as just being you go to the doctor's office. But there is, even in that, like I remember when I ended up doing a bit of a transition working in primary care as an RN, and I didn't realize all the capabilities that I had and how many things I could do to help, that took the load off of, say, another nurse, like a nurse practitioner or a physician. Like I worked in a clinic that was more of an urgent care clinic, but it was me and a nurse practitioner, and it was really empowering to see all the things that I could actually do, and the different
Yeah.
education where you're like, they actually don't need to see someone to order labs or prescribe. They need someone to actually give them some health education.
Hmm. Hmm. Which the provider doesn't have time for, right?
No.
So they're just going to go home with none unless they're lucky enough to get to spend some time with a nurse.
Yeah, like how many times have we heard that where, oh, they gave me the prescription or they told me my labs were normal,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
they don't really understand what the purpose is. Like that's something I feel like I hear over and over when I go through lab results with people. They're like, I've never had anybody sit and actually explain this to me before.
Yeah. Yeah. Or nobody's ever said this before. And it's like something really basic and obvious to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's also a reminder to all of us to just sometimes, I know I have to do this, is remind myself like people can't hear what's going on in my brain. And it's good to like verbalize some of those thoughts, because I know I have that, oh, everybody thinks these things and this is just normal. But then you start
Hmm.
talking and realize that's actually not the case.
Yep. Okay, I know there's something that you wanted to touch on that I think ties in here is one thing that I think we do as we practice functional nursing is like taking what they're telling us and we're putting it in categories and organizing it in our functional brains, right? And then retelling that to them is part of that process, right? So I was wondering
Mhm.
if you could talk a little bit about the power of using the timeline in organizing and retelling. How are you using that in your practice, and what does that mean for if you could tie that a little bit into your patient population, like how are you using that and what is it helping with?
Yeah, I love using the timeline. And I do this with every patient when I do an intake because I feel like it's a good way, a segue into learning more about your patient's life. But I also tell my patients it can seem abstract while you're asking them like, well, tell me about when you were a baby. Like they're kind of like, what? How does this make sense to my menopausal symptoms that I'm experiencing right now? But if you basically work through the timeline, so I always say going back all the way to when you were a baby, or even if you know anything about your mom's pregnancy. So even thinking like, what if they say, oh yeah, my mom had gestational diabetes, and when I was born, I was 10 pounds. So even having that little bit of knowledge right there, they could be predisposed to having diabetes in the future. And I know you could say, oh, anybody has that predisposition. It's so common, but it helps to tie it all together. So when I work through the timeline, I'm not just asking about physical health issues. I also open the door to talking about emotional health and different triggers that could happen along our lifespan or different traumatic events. And so sometimes it can get really emotional. A lot of people cry during when we go through a timeline because sometimes these are questions that nobody has ever asked. And maybe I've had people too where they say, like, this is not something I've ever told anybody. I've never really thought about this in a long time. So it's very vulnerable. So there's like a really great way to start building trust just by being there and listening for that, right? So again, that's not something that you need to be a nurse practitioner for. This is putting like the pieces of the puzzle together and critical thinking as a nurse. This is our bread and butter. we're
Yeah.
we're great listeners, right? um and empathetic too, so practicing that true listening where a lot of the time people don't feel like they've ever really had their story heard. So this is really a powerful moment for people to be able to share their story. So I always think of it breaking it down by decades. So what happened in childhood? So some of the key themes that often will pop out there might be like, I often had strep throat or ear infections, was on antibiotics all the time. That could be that's a common one that I hear. And if you think about that, so if they were on antibiotics lots as a kid, pretty much guaranteed, if you're talking to someone that's 40 years old right now, in the 90s, they were not getting probiotics after they were on
Right.
antibiotics. There was no concept of gut health then. And probably look, like, was this a healthy diet back in that time of growing up? So sometimes people too will talk about, oh yeah, I grew up on like a farm and we ate like everything fresh. And then you'll have people that are like, oh yeah, we ate like everything processed. So understanding some of that background, and even a lot of the time for women, it's having that discussion of like, what were things like when your period first started? How did that transition into adolescence go? What were the big things that happened during that huge hormonal shift, right? So I find sometimes that can be where it could be like, oh yeah, periods were heavy or painful, but sometimes there's other things that will pop in there too, like that was the time I also started getting migraines. And that was also when I started getting really anxious. So when you put those things in context and then look at it over the lifespan, you can kind of be like, okay, so they were on antibiotics a lot as a kid. That shaped their microbiome, probably in a negative way. They don't have a lot of good bacteria potentially. And then maybe they're more predisposed to having more infections in their gut, or their detoxification is slowed down. How does that then impact their estrogen level? Well, their estrogen might not be clearing as effectively as it should. That could play into the bad periods. That could be making them feel anxious or having the migraines. Maybe they also have B vitamin deficiency because they're not absorbing things properly because they've got gut issues. So that's where it's like, holy moly, that's just from talking about like the first 12 years or 15 years of their life, right? And then often there's going to be more things that come up, like, for instance, if we use me as a timeline, for example, it's like, oh yeah, and then there was that day where Megan got hit by a truck and her
Yeah.
life got flipped upside down, right? And then putting that in context of like, okay, well, she had like a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old then, and what all the other stresses were that were going on in life at that time.
And now a quick word about our sponsor, the Institute for Functional Nursing. IFN is the leading education and community platform for nurses bringing functional medicine into their practice. IFN offers everything from short, on-demand contact hour courses to the full functional nursing program, designed specifically for nurses and nurse practitioners ready to practice root cause, whole person care. If you're looking for connection and real-time learning, the Functional Nursing membership includes 4 live meetings every month where we cover case studies and have open discussions and connection. Come be a part of a movement that's redefining what it means to be a nurse. Visit fxnursing.com to learn more and join us. And now back to today's episode.
So putting those things kind of in the sequence of events, and even talking about things like, say, the other emotional things, like sometimes people will bring up like a parent dying, or maybe different, like a motor vehicle accident or something that happened that caused them a lot of stress, losing a loved one, or maybe even sometimes it's things like social dynamics of like different friendships or divorce. So many of those things can come into play. And a lot of the time, if you talk with people and kind of ask them the questions of like, what were some specific turning points? Like they'll often bring up ideas of certain times where their health really took a dive for the worse. Or sometimes asking the question, like, when did you last feel well? And then sometimes that will bring them back to like, oh, actually, when I was like 25, I was going to the gym, I was eating healthy, and I felt amazing. And then I got pregnant and I had my first kid, and I stopped doing any of that stuff for myself. And I just started eating like quick convenience foods, and I stopped sleeping. I wanted to stay up late because my kids were, always with me, and I wanted my alone time, like, so I'd stay up till midnight, like
Yep.
sometimes you get those stories, and it's so different for everybody. And I find when you use that timeline, sometimes it will be very linear, and then other times people will start being like, and this happened, and it just kind of starts opening up conversation. So that's why I usually like to start with it, because it's a good kind of icebreaker. And I will use prompts with people along the way to say, because sometimes people will just be like, oh yeah, I broke my arm when I was 7, and I don't know, then I was fine until I started having these gut issues when I saw you. Like, I'm pretty sure there's other things that happen
Yeah.
in the middle there. And it also is just creating that awareness in ourselves, right? Like, as a patient, to actually have to think about the evolution of our health, and sometimes things that we've never considered before. Like, even the other example of a concussion. So, how a concussion can really impact your gut health. Lots of people don't know that. And again, so for me, for instance, having a concussion, it was like a lot of recovery I had to do with my head, right? But also, so cognitively, also the trauma of all that, emotional. And then you're having gut issues because stress and a head injury. And then you're adding a pile of medications on top of everything. So when you go through that, and then essentially what I like to do during that is kind of take some brief notes, but I'm like taking out the key events. And then if you can regurgitate some of the key events back as a story back to the patients, they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I never really thought of it that way. And it's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
especially the, like, what happened right before that kinda thing where, like, they know
Yes.
what that thing was that happened, but when you
Hmm.
tie in the thing that triggered it, and they're so close together on the timeline, but they never thought of them as having anything to do with each other, like, "Oh, my family member died, and then I started having XYZ," and you're like,
Yes.
"These are, like, touching each other on your timeline."
Yeah, exactly. And I think with that too, it's like, it's also recognizing you can't go back and change it, but it helps us to understand where the trigger is. So, yeah, for instance, like if someone passed away, no, we can't change that. But like, okay, so it was a stressful emotional event that caused that. And it helps to guide where we need to go. Or say, for instance, like, can't change that you had all those antibiotics when you were a kid, but perhaps you can do some things to strengthen your microbiome or put some effort into the gut health now.
Can you I have noticed this come up a lot in conversations with students recently, and I know you have some thoughts on it, is like we've just named off a whole bunch of things. And with a new client, you could go down a number of rabbit holes, but boy, would that you and I know that that would overwhelm
Mhm.
somebody and they would probably be like, I can't go back. Like that was
Yeah.
too much. So like I really feel like I talk to nurses about strategies for, and I know like you do with the case studies in the membership, like strategies for choosing where to tackle things with people, how to approach them, how to bring them up and create some awareness. But I think one of the biggest things I talk about, especially with like really new functional nurses, is like order of operations. Like when you look at that intake and create that timeline and you see 10 things that you could work on with somebody, I think there is like the science behind that of like, okay, well, the biggest bang for our buck would be addressing this constipation and 4 hours of sleep every night. Like we can often identify things there, but I also think that intuition plays a really big role in
Mhm.
functional nursing at large. And I would love if you could share a little bit of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think intuition is so powerful. And I feel like most of us as nurses have some of that, like where you just get that gut feeling of what you need to do. And actually tapping into that and listening to it, right? Because a lot of the time we try to use our logic. And yes, logic does play a role, but sometimes if you're having really good connection with a person and something really sticks out to you, maybe explore that because that could be the key to where you're trying to go.
Hmm.
I also think paying attention to um, what your client is really s- looking for. Like, what is their motivation? Why did they come to see you in the first place? And you sometimes have to frame it so that they feel like they're getting what they asked for. So, not to say that you're not giving them that, but say, for instance, I'm trying to think of an example, but I think making it feel easy for them and that if you can frame it back to them that they're getting what they want out of it. So for instance, maybe someone comes to you and they say like I really want to do an elimination diet and like food sensitivity testing because I have this rash on my arm and it's been there for a long time. Like that's a pretty common thing. That's pretty smart of them to realize, like, okay, I've got a rash on my arm. I've got to take care of this, and I can't do it just by using something topical. So maybe they're like dead set on that they have to do this restrictive diet, and then they kind of go into a bit of a history with you, like maybe explaining when they go through the timeline. They also talk about like having maybe an eating disorder or something, and when they're in their younger years. So then they're looking at this and they're like trying to figure out how to control this. Like that is a logical thing to do, but that's also risky to do something like an elimination diet with someone that has an eating disorder history. So maybe you can like talk through some of that a little bit more with them and like, okay, so you had an eating disorder years ago and maybe they did have like a bunch of issues with, their gut microbiome because they were on antibiotics lots as a kid too. So maybe what you can do, you can talk through like what their diet looks like right now. And maybe they're not eating enough or they're not eating prebiotic rich foods that are going to help to support their microbiome. So they are coming with a specific of like, I think I should do this, but maybe what we need to do is like flip the trajectory of it and say like, okay, well, you know what? You maybe don't need to remove a bunch of things. Maybe we need to actually incorporate more different foods.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe we can try some different probiotics or, depending what their situation is. I don't know if that really answered the question, but
No, I think because I think you're taking just like facts and data about the patient, but like I think things come to us and we can kind of sense the direction we should go in. And there's not a good way to articulate that to like
yeah.
a peer. If somebody was like, why did you choose to do this over this? And it'd be like, well, I had a feeling. I looked at all the data and I had a feeling. And so I asked them these open ended questions. We explored it more. And
Yeah.
this is where we landed. I think too, like you were touching on earlier about just the role of nurses in this field and that idea that like a lot of this is about bringing forth like the skills that we tend to be really strong in, like empathy, listening, making everything really patient centered, and like like we talk about using the term functional medicine versus functional nursing. And this is a really great example of like, I was talking in a meeting with students the other day about physicians realizing how effective the things that holistic nurses, like the things we learn in school that then we don't have time for, like they're like, oh, hey, these things are really meaningful. And we're like, yeah, yep.
Yeah. 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 And I think, like, just going back to the intuition thing too, it is, yeah, just sometimes it's some little thing that the patient says that you can kind of hook onto. And also, I think if they're kind of getting excited about it, like, feed into that. Or if sometimes too, if they're not wanting to go somewhere, sometimes that tells us something too. And maybe you don't go there in the beginning, but it's something to like circle back to. Sometimes there's little things where people hold tight and they don't want to, yeah, don't want to address those things. But I think as nurses, and especially when you're spending the time doing all that discussion, you really do get a feel. And I mean, you could say the same thing for sometimes you hear a story and right away it sounds like, oh, that's what that is. But I think sometimes yes, that can be, but you also have to use your critical thinking lens because sometimes the classic story could be, yes, that's there. Oh, that's classic candida or something showing up, but maybe dig a little bit deeper because maybe there's a little bit of something else, some other nuance to it. There's a lot of nuance to functional medicine and
Hmm.
also just like, yeah, it's like an art.
Right. When people ask me about protocols, I'm like, nope, you're not going to get
No,
any of those. Like that just
it's
doesn't make any
all,
sense.
no, it's so unique. That's what I love is I've thought about it recently where I kind of was like, am I not getting much creativity in my life? And then I was like, actually, I'm very creative. Like every day in my work, sometimes it's like I think I'm tapped out creatively by the end of the day because, yeah, I don't ever say the exact same, like there's going to be themes that are similar that run throughout, but I never do the cookie cutter algorithm approach where, oh, this is the result, you get this. And also, I do this in a very patient centered co creation approach where it's like there's always more than one way of doing something. So if someone doesn't like the idea of, you know, doing this action, well, we'll come up with something else. That's the fun of it, right?
Yep. For the folks that aren't in the membership that are listening, so we have 4 meetings a month, and sometimes Megan will do an open discussion meeting, and another month a student-led case study, and another month a case study from her own practice. And one thing, as you were saying that really, like, popped in my head about, like, saying, that we're having these conversations with people and there is the students when they bring their case studies forward, and you can have a online session with several other functional nurses and nurse practitioners and talk for an hour about what you would do differently for that patient. Like, it isn't cookie cutter at all. It's like every patient
Exactly.
is so unique.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where it's cool having the ability to have those discussions as a group. And I know even for my last case study that I presented was one of my own patients. And it was interesting to hear the different perspectives like, oh, well, I would do this. And then, obviously I'm like, well, I know the patient better. So I did it like this. But I mean, not that I'm being defensive,
Yeah,
but
no, I know what you
it's
mean.
just like, it's so interesting how, yeah, we can all look at things from a different lens and we all have our different experience. Like we draw so much on our experience to make the decisions. You know, how sometimes that goes. Like if you had one patient recently that had this specific issue or diagnosis, then sometimes you're almost fine tuned to see that again in another person.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
it's, yeah, but it's so fun to have that group atmosphere and all kind of crowdsource information. And that's where it's really cool too, because you can get different ideas from each other and learn from one another because we all come from different backgrounds. And I think that's, yeah, pretty powerful having that shared opportunity. And I know for me, thinking back to when I started going into functional medicine, like I wish I had something like this because it can feel very lonely.
Mhm.
So if you've worked in a regular hospital setting and then you're kind of wanting to go out and do your own thing and educate yourself and learn about functional medicine, functional nursing approaches. Sometimes when you talk to the people that maybe you've worked most closely with in the past, you can kind of feel like they are looking at you like you have three heads,
Yeah.
but you're not even talking about anything that unusual. Like sometimes it's truly you're like talking about basic physiology and it's very logical, but it's not part of the guideline
So
or
true.
the
It's not
algorithm.
even funny. Like, I'm laughing because I know exactly what you're talking about, like,
Yes,
perfectly. It's not funny, but it is so true. You're just like, "So I was working with that patient to try to get them more than 5 hours of sleep a night," and they're just like, for their hypertension and, anxiety and, hormone balancing, and you're like,
yes,
to you, it's so obvious, and to them, they're like, they pay you money for that? Like, come on. Like,
yeah, yeah. So
it's really
true.
wild. I would love if you could talk about, because you actually haven't ever told me this, like your thoughts on like coming into IFN and like starting to work with the nurses and like your meetups and conversations with them. Like, what has
Mm.
that been like for you?
It's really fun. Like it's so neat connecting with people all like, people from all over the place and all different backgrounds too, right? So it's not just yeah, there are people working in inpatient settings and primary care and people that are kind of at different levels of, okay, I'm starting to see some patients, or some that are like, I want to see patients, but I'm a little bit scared to do that, or how
Mhm.
do I execute it? And yeah, it's been like, it's very fun to have those discussions. And then also, I love the community forum where we often will have like different questions. Say some people will be like, what do I do to check this interaction with a supplement? How do I do that? And so sharing resources. And yeah, I know with the other instructors too, sometimes they'll share something that I'm like, that's really cool.
Mhm.
Like I never thought of that before. So it's yeah, I think it's a really good supportive environment. Like everybody's so yeah, supportive of each other, and I think just there to help with learning and very open-minded too, right? Like I think that's a big part of functional medicine is being open-minded, but also that critical thinking where you can see someone might have a perspective, and if you don't understand it, it's okay to say like, can you explain that a little bit more? Can you
Mhm.
like write that out differently? Because I don't really understand what that means. Or can you point me in the direction of a resource? It's so nice.
Well, and we're like, I think at this point everybody is like, I'm hiring more faculty, we're building out the everybody that's going to help us build the full program, and everybody has their unique skill set. And like just recently, 3 of us went to conferences in the last month or so, right? And they were all different conferences, so we all come back with some gold, right? That then we
Yeah.
can share when we're talking to everybody else. I love that.
Hmm.
Okay, I don't want to forget to ask you this. So, I'm pretty sure you told me recently that you hired an employee,
Mm.
and I wanted if you could share a little bit about who and why and where that fits in your practice, because that has been such a big topic for me maybe the last year, is like where nurses fit in this field and how they can help solve the problems of
Yeah.
functional healthcare at large.
Yeah, so it's been interesting because as I've been, in this group and I'm like, man, all these nurses are so amazing. I need a nurse. So I've kind of been, I guess, putting it out there to the world. And so it's, I guess, still kind of in its formation, but I've taken on someone that I will be mentoring, and hopefully she will, yeah, take a role in my organization, my company. And she is a registered nurse. And yeah, it's been really cool getting to have some conversations with her, to kind of, yeah, feel out where she could fill a void in some of the work that I'm doing. And my wheels are turning on like, okay, how can I incorporate more care for my clients, my patients? And yeah, it's like, sometimes there's different areas of expertise or a different approach. So, it's just nice to build out a team. But yeah, I felt like it kind of has been on my radar for a long time. And then sometimes these things just click.
Yeah,
So
especially if it's somebody you can mentor, I bet that that's just so beneficial for both of you.
yeah, because it's nice because she's really excited about learning more and, gaining some of that knowledge without having to, yeah, kind of jump ship from
Mhm.
the system, right? And not really knowing exactly which avenue to take and also, yeah, just the business side of things. So yeah, it's an exciting time. So
I love that. I can't wait to hear how you found she fits best in your practice because I think that that's going to be something emerging for a lot of nurses and nurse practitioners as their practice grows. Then they're like, okay, I need help.
yeah,
How can I have everybody working at the top of their license essentially so that we're all
yeah,
doing.
yeah, that's right.
Okay, so when I am gonna interview somebody for the podcast, I have them fill out like a form and I ask like what you're most proud of. And I know before we hit record, I told you we could have written the exact same thing because you wrote my two things too, like your professional practice, but you mentioned your sons. And so everybody that's listening probably knows. So I have two sons, a little bit older than yours. Mine are both in college now, but like they were both here today. They're still eating whatever I'm buying, or they're cooking or shopping, or we're picking where to go out to dinner. All the things that impact how we raise our children. And then we bring in the functional approach to health for ourselves. We want it for the people around us. And when I have meetings with like lots of students and we'll have these big conversations around struggles with this and learning it, and often it comes up the parenthood role or even our patients who have children and what it's like to want this for teenage boys, for example. So I was
Mhm.
hoping you could share a little bit about what that's been like in your house.
Yeah, yeah, I'm in that stage of like I remember years ago where people were like, "Oh, you're going to spend so much on groceries." And I was like, "Kids, they don't eat that much."
Yep.
Gosh, I'm in a different stage of life now. It's like every couple days I'm like, "Where did all the groceries go?"
Yep.
Yeah, so my youngest will be 14 next month and the older is 15. So they're playing football and very active and doing their weight training. And it's really cool to see them grow up because, I mean, like of course, we're proud moms. Of course, it's always exciting to watch your kids grow up, but just seeing them to decide what their own goals and patterns will be like
Hmm.
my kids have kind of gone through phases of they're doing like they're bulking right now, like me and my husband are both kind of tall and like lean body composition. And so that's what our kids are too. And it's that struggle of like getting some of that muscle on. And so they're doing all their high calorie foods but it's really cool to see because like even for instance I was thinking about it today. Well, I know this will be out a little while later with the recording, but we're just after Halloween. I realized I we didn't have any Halloween treats in our house. Like I didn't eat anything like any single Halloween treat because my kids aren't trick or treating anymore. And like, they could have still gone trick or treating, but I they didn't ask to do anything. They didn't bring home any candy from anywhere. I mean, they probably ate candy somewhere, but it's kind of interesting to see that evolution. And yeah, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. There's certain things where you want to take lots of control. And then I try to be a bit hands off and let them make their own decisions. And it's really cool seeing how, my one son went and he slept over at another friend's house and he a couple days later was like, "Oh man, I've got acne now because I ate so much junk when I was there." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. So what are you going to do about that?" Right? Like just
Hmm.
to see that they can actually make those associations. Yeah, but they're great kids and yeah, it's cool watching them grow up. I try to set an example and
Hmm.
sometimes you feel like, oh, I'm the not fun mom. And then when you see like some of the stuff come through in them, you're like, oh, so proud, so
Yes. Yep.
proud. Yeah.
Well, no,
And yeah.
I like what you said about not wanting to control them. I feel like that, me too. I want to create awareness for patients and my kids,
Hmm.
and then they make their own choices. And I think that is like the like chef's kiss of like functional nursing is when you're a parent and your kid comes back. Cause that exact thing has come up with several students recently in meetings where they're like, and then they went to like I had told a story that is very quick, just that my son had done my older son kind of influences his little brother's friend group and they they all did this health challenge together and it was beyond food. It was like read a chapter a day of a book and go to the gym and do this. They had like all these targets they had to meet. And graduation came while they were wrapping that up. And my son was at graduation, they made him go at like 7 a.m., but it wasn't going to be until early afternoon. And he texted my older son and he's like, "Oh, I got to go." I'm like, "Where are you going? We're going to go in like an hour." And he's like, "No, they're only serving pizza and soda at graduation for them before they walk. And Wolf won't eat that. So I need to take him." He asked me if I could bring him some healthy food choices. And I'm like,
Aw,
"Oh, that's so great." He
yeah.
was the last to come around and now he's like fully in it. And I'm like, that's so cool when you see them, like your example, like they go away and make choices. And
Mhm.
and and my sons did that at that age in their teens where they're like still trying things, but we've planted those seeds to where they are just like our patients. Like you send somebody through an elimination diet and they come back and they notice things that weren't about food. They're like, "Oh, and then I was stressed out and I didn't sleep well. And then I noticed my rash was worse the next day." And
Yeah.
like that awareness, like the fact that you created that for them in childhood, like impacts their health for the rest of their life.
Yes, that's so true. And that's what's really cool. How, like, yeah, when I always think when I'm working with one patient, how that can have that ripple effect on all the other people in their life. Like, not always are you going to say, like, okay, this is what's happening with this individual, and everybody just picks up on their habit. But it's one of those things like how they say the people that you spend the most time with, you take on
Mhm.
their qualities, right? So, I feel like if we can set examples and our patients can set examples, it's like creating that positive ripple effect. And also remembering like we're not, no one's perfect. Like I think back, I mean, yeah, and I'm telling all of these great things about my kids. Obviously, like there's things that I'm like, oh, I wish you would not do that, right? Like, there's those moments. And I think back to like, oh, what was I doing when I was their age?
Mhm.
Or like I remember the evolution of being a teenager, and then I remember there was a point where I suddenly was like, I don't want to eat like this, I don't want to be like this. And I remember being like, okay, I'm gonna start eating healthy, I'm going to go to the gym. And how you can make those choices. That's another thing I've like lately, the word agency has been on my brain, where it's not an agency like the like a business you go to, but the agency of like creating change, and you have the ability to create your own path. Like you can be an agent of change. So I just think like we all choose our own trajectory, and there's going to be ups and downs, but sometimes you have to hit the down spot to realize the change has got to happen. And yeah, functional medicine is just so amazing for all of those reasons.
Yeah, and that's wrapping up. Before we're done, I wanted to just see if you could share some thoughts on like being in this space now and spending all this time with all these like really excited functional nurses and nurse practitioners in our membership. What are your thoughts on like where we're at in healthcare and what the role is for us in the next step?
Yeah, I think there's so much potential. Like if we all kind of start, I mean, not all of us, but as you know, that would be great. But I mean, the baby steps. And that's the thing. I think taking baby steps and realizing like each person that is doing these sort of things and setting a different expectation, then our patients start to expect more and different. Like you're
Mhm.
hearing more about people going into their doctor's office, nurse practitioner office, asking more questions. And that can feel scary sometimes too for the provider, like especially when you don't have time for it. But I think we have to continue to be pushing the boundaries because that's how change is going to happen. Yeah. And I think there's so much potential, and it's just, yeah, we need to all start kind of getting our feet wet or just dive right in. Like I'm in it.
Yeah, because I'm even thinking of like what we touched on at the beginning. Like, let's say you are in a clinic, you're the nurse that you were in that clinic, right? And like, no, you can't during an urgent care visit or something have like a 30-minute education
Yeah.
session. But you could absolutely be like, hey, I've noticed that you've been in here several times for this same complaint, right? It's like a recurring gut problem or something. Be like, did you know that we have a functional nurse practitioner in town named Megan, and she's really great
Yeah.
and she helps people do this deep dive. So you don't have to have all the answers
But
and quit
having
your
the
job and start a
resources.
practice. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And because that's the thing, like obviously there is a role for like the urgent care settings, and there is like you need to have emergency medicine and all like that these are all parts of the system, but the more that we can have functional medicine, functional nursing approaches available, then in the future there's going to be less burden on that system. So if we could, that's where it's like how you said, like it would be great if everybody could use this type of approach. But even sometimes it is just like having those little things to like sprinkle in, like, you know, how you say, or for people in primary care or emergency medicine to be able to say, even for instance, okay, you need antibiotics right now, but what I would recommend is after you're done these antibiotics, you make sure you take some probiotics.
Hmm.
Like more practitioners are starting to do things like that, where it's really easy to just say, here's your prescription, see you later. But it only takes like 10 more seconds to say, and follow it up with probiotic,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
And yeah, that's a great example. I mean, that's the perfect urgent care example, right? Like, hey, you're
yeah,
leaving here with antibiotics today. Did you know? Or here's a handout. And I would recommend you start these right when you're finishing up.
yeah.
So, okay, I would love for you to just share any takeaways you have for people listening that are like new to our space and like what it means to practice functional nursing versus like who we were before you were hit by a truck.
Mm. Yeah, so I think really a lot of it is like this the simplicity of it all is it really isn't that complex, and sometimes it can feel almost too simple, but it's like if we go back to the basics, like how you're saying, like getting enough sleep, your nutrition, looking at your nervous system, like if we start doing those basic things, like I mean, we can apply that to ourselves, but also for patients to be starting to look at those things. Again, it's so simple, but how often are those things overlooked in our healthcare system? So if we start kind of with those low hanging fruit, so to speak, the easy, it's easy stuff, but it's not that easy, you know, to say to someone, oh, get, you need to sleep better. But sometimes there are really simple things that you can change to create that better sleep. Or maybe it's not being prioritized. You know, you hear the people that are like, oh, I'll sleep when I die. It's like, no, actually, that's not how it works. So, yeah, I would say going back to the simple stuff and even just thinking of our basic physiology, if we go back and think about how our body is actually working and just focus on optimizing that, like even if you want to go back in your science book and be like, how does the Krebs cycle work? How do we produce
Hmm.
ATP? You know, that stuff is maybe a bit nerdy, but it's also really powerful. And if you look at the things that you need for those processes to happen effectively, it's like, yeah, there's some simple things here that we can do. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I always say functional healthcare is like acknowledging that biochemistry matters, that our cells have
yeah,
demands, right? And like somebody complains of fatigue. Most of our patients are complaining of fatigue.
yeah,
ATP, like how are they getting enough or do they have enough energy? Like what is happening there? You know, it's not
yeah,
always sleep really like directly about sleep. It could be like, are they making energy in their cells?
exactly.
So I want to put a plug in that if anybody's listening right when this is posting, it is on November 12th. So tomorrow we are having our first info session for the functional nursing program. Megan is one of our amazing faculty inside the membership. She is helping to build out our gut health portion of the functional nursing program that is launching March 2nd. So our info sessions are tomorrow, Thursday, November 13th. If you're listening to this the day it goes live, 3 p.m. Eastern, and then next Tuesday on November 18th at 8 p.m. Eastern. So you guys can use the link in the show notes to join and learn more about joining us inside the membership, joining the full program. And Megan and I have talked about her having some courses available also that are contact hours courses next year. So we're going to be exploring that because she is an absolute blessing to us at IFN. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share a lot of your wisdom with us today and how much you're sharing with everybody that's already with us. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Okay, everybody. So until next time, I wish you well, and I'm so grateful for our conversation today. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to the Functional Nurse Podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. It helps other nurses find this movement. To learn more about our programs and join the community at IFN, visit fxnursing.com. Together, we're not just rethinking healthcare, we are rebuilding it from the inside out.